what's up? Okay, so now we are in Lightroom. I'm using Lightroom version, or Lightroom CC, the 2015 version. Yeah, okay, so let's start. I'm going to show you how to turn this image right here. This is shot in RAW to this image, which I've used to emulate how film looks. Alright, so to start things off, we will take your RAW image. Okay, so with RAW, depending on what lens you've shot, it keeps the information about what lens, and then Lightroom, it allows you to fix the lens profile correction. So this is basically when your lens bulges or like makes a circular form with your image. Look, you'll see as soon as I click this, you'll see the vignetting on the edges goes away, and then the image is flattened out to what it should look like. So I also remove some chromatic aberration, just to make sure that sometimes this lens does give you some of that, just to make sure it goes away. That's just basically when you go here, when you zoom in, there's like a little bit of color fringing depending on that. Cool, so that's it. Now you see the only difference is the color. So first thing we'll do is we'll correct the exposure. I feel like this is pretty set up correctly, so I'm quite happy with the exposure, but I want it a little bit brighter. So we'll go about there. So I'll add about like 30. Alright, so the type of film I'm trying to emulate will be a more contrasty, a more warmer colored film. So this will come into play when I go through all of these edits. Yeah, so as I said, I wanted it slightly more contrasty, so I'll increase the contrast a little bit right now. And as I've mentioned before, film has a much higher dynamic range. So that means most of your shadows will be back and most of your highlights will come down. So the easiest way to do that is to drop your highlights to about like 40, increase your shadows, yeah, maybe not as much, then drop your whites a bit, and then increase the blacks a tad. Okay, let's see. Okay, cool. So basically this helps create the higher dynamic range that film creates. And because I want this film to be a more contrasty and flatter, not saturated film, so I will increase vibrance a little bit just to make sure the character of the color comes through, but I'll drop saturation just so it's a more flatter image, but it's still but the color is still there, but just a little bit more flat, which is how some film interpret it. The next thing I'll edit is the tone curve. So this is where most of the magic happens. So I'd like to set these anchor points along these lines of the tone curve. So the first thing you will notice is, you see with this film image, that there's a slight natural fade across the entire image. So how this is achieved is with your tone curve. You bring up the bottom end, so this crushes your blacks and makes your all the black along your screen basically a slight gray. So then that, as you can see here, you'll see it's a bit of fade. So that's what it actually does. You do the same with the highlights, just to make sure none of it goes crazy. And then here, this controls your shadows. And because I want a very contrasty film, I'm gonna pull that down to create this big contrast. As you can see now, it contrasts quite a lot with the shadows here along Signal Hill with the very bright white sky. And then I want the highlights to come out a little bit more too. So then I push the tone curve up. So this creates this S shape. But the main thing to have that film fade is this right here. The bottom here and the top here. So if you decrease that, okay, wait, that was a mistake. So if you push up the blacks and you pull down the whites. Yeah, so far we've got that, and next would be, alright, so the next one, okay, so my Lightroom automatic adds a little bit of sharpening. Let's see how that looks without. Okay, leave a little bit of sharpening there, but the next one would be the grain. So one of the main characteristics about film is grain. So with this film shot, if you look through here, you'll see there's this grain pattern throughout this whole image, like around here. So even though there's grain, you can still see it's a pretty sharp image where like all the edges along the mountain is quite defined. So for this one, I'm going to add some grain. At about like 40, maybe 30. Okay, that's a bit. Okay, because I'd like some grain in the image, but not too much to make it too grainy. So let's say about like a 30, 32. Yeah, okay, fairly happy with that. Increase the size of the grain to about like 40. So there. Right now you have a very film looking image. And then the last thing I want to do is, as I mentioned, I want a slightly warmer colored film. So this is usually like Kodak Gold or Color Plus, depending which one you can find. I like shooting those film stocks, so with this image I like recreating that too. So I'm just going to make that slightly warmer. And there, that's most of it. But the last final thing will be edits in your hue, saturation and luminance. So what I'd do here is hues. I'd keep that about the same because I don't want any of the colors to go completely off, but I do want slightly more orange. So for this I will drop saturations a bit on most of the colors. So green, blue, magenta, purple, magenta. But I'd push the orange and the yellow a little bit with a tiny bit of green. Wait, actually, less green, just to make sure it doesn't. Actually, no, I'll bring the green down a little bit more, just so it doesn't look like this brown, dirty color. And let's see, push up the yellow a little bit. Yeah, so okay, I'm quite happy with that. And the next thing is luminance. This is basically how much the colors, or the certain color glows. The way I do this, luminance, usually is how I look at the image and I see over here, these rocks, or this rocky path here, it's a little dull, so, or the yellow looks a bit dull. So what you do is you click on this tool. This helps you to like spot edit, whatever colors there are. So over here I can see, I click on the rocks, then you'll see right here, it highlights which colors it glows, which it edits. So if you look on the right here, how my luminance is changing. So you click and you drag your mouse up or down. So I'm dragging it up a little bit, just so those glow a bit, just so that like it's a little bit brighter. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit too bright. I want to brighten the sky a little bit as well. So I click here and then maybe not that part of the sky. So here. As you can see, the luminance can't affect only this orange color. So there, that's how we have it. And let's see. Okay, that doesn't do too much. Okay, so that's how I like the image. And then I feel, okay, it's still a little bit underexposed. So I just push the exposure up a little bit. And there. So that's how I edit my photos to look like film. So just a quick recap, the most important things is you edit your highlights, shadows, your whites and your blacks. You do it this way, where you bring down your highlights and you push up your shadows a little bit. This is to give the higher dynamic range that film gives compared to digital photos. And then I pull down the saturation a little bit. This is because how the film I want to emulate has a slightly less saturated color. And the tone curve, so pushing up the bottom will give you that fade, and if you bring down the top, also brings them, just like make sure the highlights aren't blown out. And lastly, it would be the color. Well, not lastly, with the color, I wanted a slightly warmer color, so this is why saturation of yellow and orange is pushed up a little bit. Red, okay, there's not so much red in this image, which is why it doesn't really matter to me, but you push up the colors that you'd want. So if you want colder, like a colder tone in your image, you'd push up your green, your blues and your aqua, and a little bit of your purple maybe. And then it all depends on the type of film you want to emulate. So for mine, I'd like this to be more of a warmer colored film, so that's why I've done this. And then lastly would be your, where is this now, your grain. So the main characteristic of film is the grain. So don't overdo grain, because if you do it too much, the image just looks like it's been shot on a, I don't know, a really old cell phone or really bad film. So don't overdo that, but around 30 I think is a fair medium. And then yeah, you'll see, as I mentioned before, the roughness is how prominent the film kind of shows up. So you see, when it's at about like 7, this would be interpreted as fine grain. So as I mentioned earlier with the Ektar 100 as being a professionally grade film, the grain would be quite small and fine, and then as you increase it becomes rougher, and that's usually characteristics of cheaper film or film pushed up to very high ISOs. So default's 50, and I'm happy with that. Size of the film about 40, and the amount of, or I forgot 30, that's where I'd like to keep it. So yeah, this is how I've turned this image into this one, which looks like film.